You're sitting around a fire. It's roughly 10,000 BC, somewhere in what we'd now call the Middle East. The group has been hunting for 3 days straight. Everyone is exhausted, everyone is hungry. The mood around that fire is not great. And then someone reaches across to grab a piece of meat with their left hand. And the conversation stops. Not because the meat was taken, because of which hand took it. Someone mutters something, someone else moves slightly away. The left-handed person notices. They always notice. That reaction, that instinctive, immediate social freeze, wasn't random. It wasn't a quirk of one particular tribe or culture. It happened across the ancient world with consistency, in places that had never made contact with each other, in civilizations separated by oceans and mountain ranges, and thousands of years. The fear of the left hand kept showing up, over and over like a signal being broadcast from somewhere deep inside human psychology. Here's what most people assume when they first hear about this. They assume it was purely superstition, a few scared people in robes making up rules, something pre-scientific, irrational, the kind of thing we obviously grew out of. And that assumption is wrong. In a way, that's actually fascinating, because the fear of left-handedness wasn't just some cultural accident. It was generated independently, repeatedly, by societies that had no contact with each other whatsoever. That's not superstition spreading. That's something else entirely. That's a pattern. And patterns that show up everywhere, in every era, across every culture, tend to have a reason. Not always a good reason. Not always a reason we're proud of once we understand it. But a reason rooted in something real, about how the human brain works, how human groups form, and what happens when someone inside the group does something just slightly differently from everyone else. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why your ancestors were terrified of left-handed people. You're going to see how that fear got baked into language, into religion, into law, into the daily rituals of dozens of civilizations. You're going to find out what they actually did about it, and some of it is dark. And then you're going to hit the part that nobody talks about, the part where evolution itself has something uncomfortable to say about why left-handers never disappeared, why 10% of the human population has been left-handed for 500,000 years running, through every attempt to suppress it, punish it, and pray it away. That number didn't survive by accident, and the reason it survived changes everything. About how you understand the story you just walked into. Here's the thing about language. It doesn't lie, not about the deep stuff. You can rewrite history, you can burn libraries, you can officially declare that something never happened. But the words a culture uses every day, the words so ordinary nobody even thinks about them anymore, those words fossilize the truth. And when you look at what ancient languages did with the concept of left, the fossil record is damning. In Latin, the word for left is sinister. You already know that word. You know it because it survived, because it traveled through 2,000 years of European history and landed intact in modern English, still carrying every gram of its original meaning. Evil, threatening, morally wrong. In French, left is gauche, which also means awkward, clumsy, socially graceless. In Italian, mensino, derived from a root meaning defective. In Russian, Levy has carried connotations of something shady, something not quite legitimate, something done through the back door, and then there's the English word right itself, which doesn't just mean the direction, it means correct, it means moral, it means the thing you're supposed to do, the right answer, the right thing. Do right by someone, you have rights. These are not coincidences, these are sediment layers, evidence of what a civilization actually believed, compressed into vocabulary and carried forward by every generation that never stopped to ask why. Now go wider, go outside Europe entirely. In Mandarin Chinese, the character for left has historically carried associations with inferiority and the improper. In Arabic tradition, the left hand is specifically designated for bodily hygiene and considered unclean for eating, greeting, or any act of social respect. In Japanese, there are historical records of left-handedness being treated as a defect requiring correction. Across sub-Saharan African traditions, across South Asian cultures, across pre-Columbian societies in the Americas, the same asymmetry keeps appearing. Right means good, sacred, strong, correct. Left means something else, something lesser, something watched. This didn't travel. That's the part that matters. Arabic and Mandarin and Latin and Swahili didn't borrow this from each other. These linguistic systems developed independently across completely separate civilizations, and they all arrived at the same place, which means the fear wasn't cultural contamination. It was something generated from inside, From inside, how human groups organize themselves, how they mark belonging and deviation, how they treat the minority whose body moves through the world just slightly differently from everyone else. And then religion got involved, and things got considerably darker. The Old Testament is explicit about it. The right hand of God appears over 100 times across Scripture. It is the hand of power, the hand of blessing, the hand of covenant. When you swear an oath, you raise your right hand. When a king bestows favor, it comes from his right side. In Matthew, the righteous stand at the right hand of God on Judgment Day. The damned stand on the left. That's not metaphor buried in footnotes. That is the central sorting mechanism of salvation, written plainly, repeated constantly, absorbed by every person who ever sat in a church in the last 2,000 years. Islam formalized it into daily practice. The right hand for eating, for greeting, for entering a home. The left hand designated specifically for impurity. This wasn't optional cultural preference, it was religious obligation, codified and enforced across an entire civilization spanning continents and centuries. In Hinduism, the left hand is associated with Vama, a term that covers both the left side and transgressive, dangerous, or polluting ritual practice. The mainstream and the left-handed path were considered genuinely different spiritual orientations, one acceptable, one requiring careful handling at best. And here's where it stopped being theology and started being policy. Medieval Europe decided that left-handedness wasn't just suspicious. It was evidence. Evidence of consorting with the devil, of being marked at birth by dark forces, of carrying something corrupt inside the body that expressed itself through the wrong hand. Accused witches were examined for signs of the devil's mark, and left-handedness appeared regularly on the list of indicators. It wasn't the only factor, but it was a factor. In a courtroom where your life depended on not appearing different, reaching for something with your left hand in front of the wrong person could contribute to a verdict that ended with fire. Outside the courtroom, the correction happened earlier. In schools across Europe and colonial America, well into the 20th century, left-handed children had their left hands tied behind their backs. They were struck across the knuckles with rulers when they reached with the wrong hand. They were made to practice writing with their right hand until the left hand became something they were ashamed of, something they hid, something they learned to suppress before anyone could see it. This wasn't fringe behavior in remote schools. This was standard educational practice, documented, systematic, generational. The last major wave of forced conversion in American schools didn't end in the Middle Ages. It ended somewhere around the 1950s and 1960s. There are people alive today whose left hands were beaten into compliance before they were 10 years old. And yet none of it worked. Not the theology, not the legislation, not the rulers across knuckles, not the tied back hands. The left-handers kept appearing. Every single generation, in every culture that tried to eliminate them, roughly 1 in 10 children reached for the world with the wrong hand. Which is where the story stops being about fear and starts being about something much stranger, 500,000 years. That's how far back the archaeological evidence for left-handedness goes. Researchers can determine handedness from ancient skeletal remains by measuring subtle asymmetries in bone density and muscle attachment points. They can determine it from ancient tools, from the direction of cut marks on prehistoric animal bones, from the wear patterns on stone scrapers made by hands that are long gone. And what those remains show consistently across every population, every continent, every era of human prehistory is the same ratio that exists today. Roughly 10% left-handed, 90% right. It has not moved. Think about what that means. Every civilization that punished left-handedness failed to reduce it. Every religion that marked it as spiritually corrupt failed to breed it out. Every school that tied back the left hand failed to change the underlying neurology of the next generation. The ratio stayed fixed through all of it. And in evolutionary biology, when a trait persists at a stable minority frequency across hundreds of thousands of years, despite pressure against it, that is not an accident. That is a signal. Evolution does not accidentally maintain something that costs the individual carrying it. There has to be a reason. Researchers have been working on this for decades, and the answer that keeps emerging is a competitive one. In a population that is overwhelmingly right-handed, a left-hander has a surprise advantage in direct physical competition. The angle of attack is unexpected. The defensive patterns trained against right-handed opponents don't apply. Studies of professional athletes in one-on-one sports, boxing, baseball, fencing, tennis, show left-handers consistently overrepresented at elite levels far beyond their 10% share of the population. In ancient human groups where physical competition decided status, resources, and survival, that asymmetry mattered. It mattered enough to keep the trait alive. But there's a second layer that goes deeper than fighting. Left-handedness correlates with different patterns of brain lateralization, different distributions of cognitive function across the two hemispheres. Researchers have found elevated rates of left-handedness among architects, musicians, mathematicians, and certain categories of visual spatial thinkers. The same neurological difference that made ancient communities suspicious may have also produced the people most capable of solving problems the group had never encountered before. The outlier brain. The one wired just differently enough to see the angle nobody else saw. So here is what the full picture looks like. Ancient humans feared left-handers because human groups fear consistent deviation, because the brain that is different is the brain that is unpredictable. And unpredictable inside your own group is dangerous before it is useful. The fear was real, and the fear made a kind of brutal evolutionary sense. And at exactly the same time, the thing they were afraid of was also the thing keeping them alive. The left-hander they tied to the stake was the same statistical category as the left-hander who solved the problem that saved the village the following winter. You can't have one without the other. You never could. Right now, roughly 10% of the people reading this reached for their phone or their mouse with their left hand. The ancient world built entire theological systems to explain why that hand was wrong. Evolution kept it anyway. That gap between what humans decided to fear and what reality quietly preserved is one of the oldest stories our species has, and we are still, in ways we don't always notice, living inside it.